We come to the third of our lectures discussing 36 events that have changed history, that have changed the world forever. We've discussed the Law Code of Hammurabi and the revelation to Moses. In choosing all of these events, I have insisted that the event be important in itself. 2, that it changed history, that even afterwards, immediately, the world was different. And then finally, that event, its consequences, reverberate still with us today. The Middle East, we have said, was from the beginning of history the crucible of conflict and the graveyard of empires. The Babylonia of Hammurabi would pass away, once a mighty empire. Israel, brought into being by Moses, captured the land of Canaan. That too, Israel, would become a great power. And by around 1000 BC, under King David and then under Solomon, Israel was one of the superpowers of the Middle East, moving into a power vacuum made possible by the collapse of the Egyptian Empire and by the collapse of the Hittite Empire. But the empire of Israel would fall as well. And the story of the historical books of the Old Testament is the story of a nation that again and again rebelled against the law of God as given in the Ten Commandments, time and time again would repent, only to rebel again, until finally Israel was destroyed, and its population carried off, and this is real history, to Babylon by a resurgent Babylonian empire in the 6th century BC. And there would remain for more than 2 generations until the people of Israel were allowed to go back to their homeland by the clemency of a new empire that had arisen, the empire of Iran, of Persia, under King Cyrus, who would even pay the money to help rebuild the temple. But that time in Babylonia, that period of the 6th century BC, was for the people of Israel a transforming period. The religion began to focus on why Israel had fallen like that, how had it lost the love of God for that moment, and what was its historical origins. A new focus on the 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, written, it was said, by Moses. The rise of new groups like the Pharisees to interpret the law of Moses. It was a religious renewal of the people of Israel that would shape its religion for the rest of history. But that was only one religious renewal going on in the 6th and 5th century BC all over the world. Indeed, that was such a fundamental period, the 6th and 5th century BC, let us say from 563 BC, the birth of Buddha, right down until 399 BC, the execution of Socrates. That was such a fundamental religious renewal that historians and philosophers have called it the axial age, the age in which the world sort of regrouped itself and began to turn around fundamental religious values that still shape our world today. It was the age of Buddha, the age of Confucius, the renewal of Judaism, and the golden age and the seminal age of Greek philosophy, the religion taught by Greek philosophy embodied in the works of Socrates. And all 4 of these developments, the renewal of Judaism, the religion of Buddha, and thought of Confucius, and Socrates, still shape in fundamental ways our world today and our ideas. Moreover, all 4 of these religious movements dealt with a fundamental fact that any thoughtful person considers perhaps almost every day. The meaning of our life. Why are we here? Now, I know it's easy to forget about that as you're driving along the superhighway and just worried on keeping yourself alive from some crazy driver, or dealing with the children, driving them back and forth to soccer practice, or dealing with an unfeeling boss. But every day you ought to step back and contemplate, what means all of this? Why are we doing it? And even deeper questions like evil. Does evil exist? And if there is a God, why does he permit evil to exist? And how am I to deal not only with all the joy, but with all the sorrow that life brings me? And each of these fundamental religious movements, Judaism, it's the Judaism of the prophets. Buddhism, Confucianism, and the teaching of Socrates ponder these questions, and they reach an astonishing agreement on fundamental issues. And that is to say, how do you live your life? Why, one, you honor God, and two, you respect your neighbor. Confucius, Buddha, Socrates, and you find it in the Old Testament, all say very much the same basic moral tenet. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. All are concerned with morality in its fundamental meaning of how to live your life. And all come down to four fundamental moral principles: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. The formulation of these fundamental principles was the great achievement of this axial age, whether in China or India, in Israel or in Greece. What is wisdom? Wisdom is first of all, in the words of the Old Testament, it is the fear of the Lord. For Buddha, that wisdom was achieving a perfect self-contentment. But wisdom is how you apply all the information and knowledge, what Confucius called study, how you apply all of that to the way in which you live your life. That is true wisdom. And then justice. Justice most fundamentally is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But in every way it is described by a term like benevolence. Treating people properly, treating them with respect, being fair, keeping your word. And courage. Fundamental to these ideals of the axial age is not just that you should know wisdom, not just that you should act justly and know what justice is. You should have the courage to do what is right, not just towards other people, but for yourself. And all of these religions are, in a very important way, selfish. Focus upon yourself as well as others and be just to yourself. So courage is doing what is right, not just knowing it. And moderation. All of these prescribe moderation. Not just a sense of what is appropriate, but what is appropriate in a particular action. And what is appropriate to yourself as well as others. Because you see, courage without justice, all of these teachings tell us, is just brutality. An SS soldier is not courageous, he's brutal because he's fighting in an unjust cause. And moderation also teaches you when it makes any sense to do something. You know, there are a lot of causes and battles that come before you in life that aren't worth the fight. You got a traffic ticket, we mentioned that earlier on, just pay it. Don't go and appeal it. So moderation. And all four of these religious currents are based upon how to live your life in the present. And none of these has been more influential and continues to influence every day of the year the lives of billions of people in crucial areas of the world than Buddhism. The teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, born in the year 563 BC, and the embodiment of the striving and the wisdom of this axial age. He was born to a royal family in India, in the subcontinent, in an area close to the foothills of the Himalayas. Now, India in the 6th century BC was a vibrant civilization, divided into a number of smaller kingdoms and republics, those governed by oligarchs. But Siddhartha Gautama's father was a king. He grew up in royal privilege and splendor. It was an age of commercial prosperity, and a whole new group of wealthy merchants had grown up in the prosperity of India with no thought other than just making money, a greedy society not unlike our own. India had already been the center of one great civilization along the Indus Valley that came to an end around 1700 BC when it was invaded by mighty warriors from the Iranian area who called themselves Aryans, which meant noble. Their language would develop into Sanskrit. They would conquer the Indus Valley civilization. And by 1000 BC, not only had these invaders become at home in India, but they had entered upon a remarkable spiritual development. The magnificent poetry of the Sanskrit Vedas celebrated the relationship of God to man. But by the 6th century BC, a new form of literature, the Upanishads, had arisen, which focused upon this question of the meaning of life. And it is not something that is simply dictated to you by God. No, it is something you must search for. And so in the India in which Buddha was born, there were numerous wandering wise men. The word for them actually was beggars. They had left behind all of their worldly goods. They took whatever was offered to them. Many of them went through the most terrible mortification of the body, but all of them searching for what is the meaning of my life. And all of them seeking in their own way to escape from the wheel of life. They believed deeply in the idea of karma. That is to say, and it's something not to dismiss, every act you take of the largest and smallest variety has consequences, and you will be held accountable for it. They believed also, as did Plato, as did Socrates, in the transmigration of the soul, that when you die and you have a soul, that soul will almost certainly be reborn. And if your karma, if the deeds you have done have been wholly evil, if, as Socrates actually described it, your soul is encrusted with all the evil deeds you have done, why, you might come back as a dung beetle. But no, you've lived your life well and you've tried to do nothing but good. Well, you might come back as a soul so devoted to learning that you'll become a wandering wise man, a beggar, and maybe ultimately find the truth that will liberate your soul, free you forever. But Buddha's father did not want that life for his son. Oh, no. Would you want your son to become a wandering beggar? Yes or no? No, of course not. And so he tried to, one, raise him to be a good king, and two, to keep away from him as much of the unpleasantness of life as he could. And I think many of us try to do that with our children today. And he celebrated Buddha with beautiful women, luxurious chariots, the sort of counterpart of buying your child a Porsche today, and wanted the Buddha just to see good things. And Buddha got married, but he was already questioning little Siddhartha Gautama, because he's not yet the Buddha. Siddhartha Gautama was already questioning. And when his bride gave him a baby, a little boy, he loved the little creature, but he named him Ruhala, which means the little ball and chain, the little creature that is going to tie me to this world. And so he asked his charioteer to take him out into the world outside of the palace walls and show him what the world was really about. And no sooner had they started out than They came upon a wizened-looking figure, bald-headed, cracked skin, couldn't remember anything. And young Siddhartha said, what is that? And the charioteer said, that's an old man. That's awful. I know. Why is he like that? We all get that way. Everybody, if they live long enough, turns into an old man or woman like that. Oh, that's awful. I know. Well, there you are. Well, they went out on another drive, and they came upon this person who was terribly deformed. Siddhartha said, what is that? What is that person? Oh, he has a disease. A what? A disease. It has turned him into that. Oh, disease is awful, I know, but anybody who lives in the world will have to deal with it, not only for himself, but far more awful is when it strikes your children, or a friend, or a wife, or a husband. Oh, disease, old age. What's that? That's a dead body. What? Yes, that body is dead. Everybody will die. Listen to me, Prince, that is one thing you can be sure of. Everybody in the world will die. What's that man running around in the nude there? Now that is a wise man. At least he's seeking wisdom. He has thrown away all the luxuries of the world, left his family, and gone out in search of wisdom. So, of course, Siddhartha went home and said, Daddy, that's what I want to be. No! But he was determined. And he left in the dead of night, telling no one. He went up and looked at his little boy one more time and then left and joined those who were wandering in the search of wisdom. And year after year he followed that search, and he was convinced that the only way to find wisdom was to subject his body to the most severe discipline. That was the standard way of a wandering holy man. So he went without food for days on end, or a big meal for him would be a peanut or a leaf of lettuce, until he became so thin that his ribs almost stuck to his backbone. He became so utterly devastated by starvation that he looked dead. I don't think we go quite those extremes, but there are people today who try to bring their weight down so much that they mortify the flesh, I think. And finally he was thought to be dead, and this girl said, he's dead. And only gave a little bit of sign of life. And she took pity on him and forced him to accept some milk and some rice pudding. And it came to Siddhartha that mortifying your flesh was just as bad as overindulging it. So the first wisdom that came to him was that of moderation, a middle way, and choosing what is appropriate for you. Now, wisdom, let's understand that term. There's information, there's knowledge, and there is wisdom. Now, information is what we're surrounded with, and there was already an overflow of information in the age of Siddhartha. Information is what you find on the internet. Information is what is blared at you 24 hours a day from the television. But you take that information and you turn it into knowledge. Like a good teaching company course is knowledge about a particular field, like 36 events that have changed history. But you must go on and apply that knowledge to how you live your life in such a way that you leave the world a better place. And that is what all of these teachers sought to do, leave the world in a better place. So wisdom. And the first step for Siddhartha was the wisdom of moderation. He decided that he would sit under a tree, and the tree is still a great sacred relic in India, sit under that tree until he achieved wisdom. And it came to him. It came to him after 6 years of thought and wandering, what he called the Four Noble Truths. The first of these is the truth of suffering. That life is suffering. Now, we can disagree with this, but for him, life was suffering. And what makes us suffer? That was the second noble truth. It is desire, wanting things. That is why we suffer. I want this job. I want my child to be this way. I don't want any sickness. Things that you really cannot control, you want. And this desire is what keeps the wheel of life going. Each one of these desires then leads you into an action that may be harmful to yourself or others. So what is the third noble truth? Stop wanting things. But how do you stop wanting things? And that was the fourth noble truth. The pathway, the way. The same word that the early Christians used to describe Christianity. The way that you take in life. And that way begins first with a right view, followed by a right intent, and then a right effort. Right view, you come to understand that life is suffering, and you must overcome that suffering by giving up desire. And then it becomes your intent. That's not just your view, it's your intent to do it. And then you got to make an effort to do it. Not just intend to do it, but an effort to do it. And how do you make that effort? Well, there are three more rights. The right speech, right action, and right means of earning a living. Now, I'm not sure that any of those six are outmoded today or without meaning to us. In the 21st century, whether in Europe or America as well as Asia or Africa, decide what you want to do, make a right choice to do it, understand why it's the right thing for you, and then intend to do it, and then start doing it. And it doesn't matter what religion or lack of religion you have. Why not tell the truth with right speech? Why not act right, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? You might find it makes you happy. And then right livelihood. And Siddhartha Gautama had a series of livelihoods that were forbidden. Being a butcher was forbidden. Making weapons of war was a forbidden and evil livelihood that would weigh down your soul with karma. And producing and selling alcoholic beverages. And that I find very troubling. I've always wanted to own a vineyard in Tuscany, but I can't now that I have studied the Buddha. So right means of livelihood excludes a vineyard in Tuscany. But once you have started on that path, then you can put your mind into position to achieve wisdom. And Buddha was deeply concerned with your ability to control your mind. That's why he and so many of the Indian wise men practice yoga, by which your mind can control your body. And take just simply this. How many times during the day does your mind go over and over again some little wrong that you received that day or the week before that, and worrying about that wrong that you've received then leads to, by association, to another wrong and another wrong. And you find yourself almost in a cycle in your mind going through all the bad things that have happened to you, all the pointless things that have happened to you. So put your mind right, and then you can achieve pure meditation. And that is what Buddha did under his tree. He thought, he achieved the solitude. And it is this lack of solitude that is the most difficult thing to come by today. Everything in our world is determined not to allow us to be by ourselves. The cell phone jangling in your pocket, Buddha would have said, take it out. Most of those messages are just going to make you think bad thoughts. The constant blaring of the television, all of that, and the non-stop chatter of the world at large. The person who can't walk through to an aeroplane without blathering away on a cell phone. All of that prevents your meditating. And meditation is the final step. And that is what the Buddha achieved, because he now became the Buddha. the enlightened one, the wise one. And he achieved nirvana. Nirvana, the word means blowing out, like snuffing out a candle. It is not a nothingness in your soul, it is the fulfillment of your soul. But it is snuffing out all of the greed and irritation and hate that mars your life. Snuff that out. And then you will achieve not only wisdom, but liberation. Well, what do you do with this? And the Buddha thought, this is such a hard path, I must just keep it to myself. But no. Others had come to watch him meditating, and when he began to tell them what he had achieved, they said, you have got to go out into the world. We will become your students. And the same is said of Jesus. Like Jesus, Buddha was a teacher. Like Jesus, he never wrote a word. He would not get tenure at a university today. But a group of students gathered around him, and they became the disciples of Buddha. And they said, you have got to go out into the world and preach this lesson. Preach this way of achieving wisdom, of snuffing out all the hatred. And so for the next 45 years, he preached and taught, converting thousands and thousands to this way, living on to the age of 80, suffering all the pangs of old age, suffering revolts among some of his students, but dying as he had lived those 45 years in the complete peace of knowing the meaning of his life. That he had come for a purpose, he had taught that purpose, the world was a better place because he had taught that purpose, but above all, he had achieved complete peace with himself. Now that message would speak down through the ages. In fact, about 200 years, 263 BC, after Buddha had died, King Ashoka, the first mighty warrior to unify the entire Indian continent, would adopt the teachings of Buddha and immediately proclaim a doctrine of ahimsa, of total peace and nonviolence, and build his kingdom upon the abolition of warfare, and seek to carry that message to far corners of the world, to Greece, all the way out to Ceylon. And so this message of peace would spread all through Asia, Japan, China, Korea, Burma, Thailand. All of these nations, cultures, fundamentally transformed by the teaching of Buddha. There are more than 80,000 Buddhist shrines in Japan. And if no one is able to achieve this complete peace, this complete life lived without any violence towards other creatures, nonetheless it remains a shining ideal, proclaimed in poetry, proclaimed in art, that shows the Buddha, the enlightened one, little tubby, little pot belly, a smile of contentment upon his face. It is a religion that has spoken to many Americans in the hurry and bustle and seeming meaningless of the 21st and 20th centuries. And it is a message, even if you don't adopt it in its fullness, but a message of leaving behind all that makes you angry and treating everyone the way you would want to be treated, that can still speak and give meaning to your life.